Welcome back to another HRO Today educational podcast. I'm Elliot Clark, the CEO of HRO Today. We publish HRO Today magazine, HRO Today EMEA, and HRO Today APAC, and we are the producers of the HRO Today Forum series held around the world and the managers of the HRO Today Association. Today, we're coming to you virtually to talk about virtually, and that is virtually hiring. It is a significant topic and one that has become even more pressing in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic. So as we sit in the decade-long 2020, and it seems that way for many of us, we're all trying to figure out what the best practices are for managing virtual hiring. And we've got an expert on virtual hiring here today to give us perspective on best practices and what her organization is learning. We're joined by Germayne Cade, who is the Vice President of Client Solutions in North America for RPO. Germayne has been with Korn Ferry since 2002. And Korn Ferry, as you all know, is one of the largest providers of HR services and technology in the world. They provide all kinds of solutions for recruitment, retention, engagement, and compensation. Germayne is the VP of Client Solutions for their recruitment process outsourcing division. And as I said, she's been with them for nearly 20 years. She's also been in many direct facing client roles in sales, etc. So she has worked very closely with clients in her current role and even in her prior role in trying to figure out how to fashion the solutions that they'll use in their ongoing talent acquisition operations. So Germayne, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Elliot.
Germayne, give us a quick overview of the RPO business at Korn Ferry for our listeners.
Sure. Korn Ferry RPO is a 20-year-old mature global business. We have tremendous depth and breadth in professional, high volume, early career, hourly, and essentially the vital many across all markets, sectors, and function. And we really do take pride in being able to meet our customers wherever they are in the world while taking care to provide what we refer to as a glocal. So globally being where you are, but providing that local perspective every time.
And now you could be anywhere. So for our podcast listeners, you may hear in the background, because we all now work from home, instead of being in the studio with Germayne, she is also trying to take care of her 7-month-old puppy at home while doing a podcast, something we can all understand because we're all working at home. So Germayne, since you're working virtually, let's talk about virtually hiring. And historically, hiring has relied, you didn't think I'd get the puppy in there, Germayne, but I did.
I did.
Historically, hiring has relied heavily on human interaction, human intuition. Sit across the table, look someone in the eye, get a feeling for what they're like. But now, as we're navigating the COVID-19 global pandemic, being in the presence of humans is not only not comforting, it's maybe downright dangerous. So as a result, many companies, if not all of them, globally have had to shift to some form of remote or virtual recruiting process. And that's not necessarily all bad. So what are the opportunities or obstacles that a company should be assessing and the tools that are available to use for virtual recruiting?
I think as we've seen, what would have taken organizations years to accomplish was accomplished overnight. And so similarly, organizations who were already trending towards virtual recruiting solutions pre-COVID as more so of a nice to have, in this COVID era, this is almost a necessity, a demand to have a virtual recruitment option. And while there have been some general advantages with leveraging a virtual recruitment environment, like being more efficient, effective, engaging, inclusive, being high touch, and always on is what it provides, I think the reality is for organizations, it's really about how do they find talent faster, better, with cost optimization, and never losing sight of promoting an amazing candidate experience through this kind of COVID dynamic. And so, when we think about it, a virtual recruiting environment, it's about creating readiness and de-risking your talent strategy. So how do you set your talent function up for what could potentially come next, given the natural volatility and potential market challenges that could be on the horizon as we see surges, et cetera? I think if I pause and think about the tools, really the great news is that there is a wealth of recruiting online tools that can uplift and accelerate a virtual recruiting environment. And they really do now span across the entire recruitment spectrum from a source to hire. And I'll just rattle off a few examples. So if you think about virtual event tools where they're managing high volume of interested applicants and could elevate a company's brand, video interviewing, that's been part of, I think, the interview process if it's remote to enable efficiency for recruiters and candidates, job augmentation, so a way to bolster your job applications. Language testing we're seeing that become sometimes a critical element, particularly if there are global hiring. And so this gives you the ability to assess and analyze language abilities of candidates, all from, again, a remote virtual setting to employee referrals, internal mobility directed right at your internal talent, onboarding, which is going to enable you to be more efficient in this process. I can't tell you how much of a request when organizations, again, overnight had to adjust their talent structure, had to rely on e-onboarding. There's just so much in the market right now. Finally, because you asked about a challenge, I think certainly for organizations, and rightfully so, there are concerns about losing the high-touch human element or selecting tech for the sake of tech. And so I would encourage organizations that as they're looking at transitioning to a virtual environment, to make sure whatever tech is selected, that it's fit for purpose, that it is allowing the technology to walk alongside people, provide that agility to scale up recruiting and have that flexibility.
And from the standpoint, a lot of people, they think of video interviewing as being virtual, but how are you recommending clients look at the use of things like chatbots, virtual helpers? You mentioned virtual events. Do clients really need to start thinking about recreating their entire infrastructure as if they had two streams, a live stream when that was possible and a virtual stream that they may want to use for candidates who are remote or where there's a great deal of travel to do interviewing or whatnot? So are you seeing a lot of companies really embrace having that virtual channel permanently, or are people just trying to patchwork through the pandemic?
I think it's a combination of both, but organizations who are leading the way, being proactive to fortify their talent acquisition strategy and infrastructure are thinking about AI because it's really driving change in the market. So it's no longer about sourcing or stack ranking. This is helping you to identify the best fit candidate from an interested standpoint, a purpose, traits, drivers perspective. AI is really driving everything. Video interviewing technology, it's one element, and it can be in a synchronous or asynchronous environment. And I think that just depends upon an organization, where they set it within the workflow and what their aims are. But we are seeing companies gravitate more towards using the chatbot, again, to create a robust candidate experience because it's always on and it's 24/7 and it's bolstering an organization's EVP while they sleep.
So let's move on to the actual candidate experience. You've referenced it a few times. You guys just did a recent study, Korn Ferry, so I'm quoting from your study, that 53% of candidates complained about losing contact or being, and I'll use the term from your own report, ghosted by recruiters. It sounds a lot like a dating site, but okay. People are losing candidates or being ghosted by recruiters. I could make a joke about being catfished by candidates and have threatened to do that on this podcast, right? You think you're getting one thing, get something else when you actually talk with them. But as we're going more virtual, okay, and it offers some changes to that candidate experience. So what are the opportunities that companies have? And you've touched on a little bit of it, but I want to really bore down on this point to improve candidate experience and employer brand using virtual recruiting and what also should be avoided. So we want to avoid the ghosting, and that's pretty clear, but what can you do using virtual recruiting to actually enhance employer brand, and what should you avoid? And candidate experience, I should say.
Yeah, I will say we were a bit surprised, Elliot, to find the percentage of candidates who felt they were still being ghosted, meaning they fell into that proverbial black hole so high. Because to your point, it does negatively impact the organization's brand and EVP, particularly as organizations are increasing their e-commerce side of the business. And so we recommend that organizations operate and adopt a candidate's mindset. So think about when you're creating your virtual environment, what's important to them? And then think about what's been removed from the in-person process that you now need to create in a virtual environment to make sure that it's an enriching simulation. And when we think about video interviewing, is it creating a environment so that when they walk into the corridor, they immediately get the essence of the company's, either their corporate or a manufacturing facility as examples? If we think about maybe creating a tour of an office or a city and replicating that within a virtual environment so that when that candidate walks away, because they haven't been able to be inside and walk the hallways, they still have a good pulse on what the company stands for. What we also recommend is to be authentic through this and bring the organization's kind of corporate responsibility and feel to life. And so if that is, again, thinking about sharing benefits in a virtual environment and talking authentically about the change of the organization and that they're on a journey, invite them to go on a journey with you. Some obstacles to avoid would be the ghosting, as we've talked about, but then also creating a static environment that is pretty staid and stodgy. Candidates, although there's a plethora of candidates right now in the market, the really good ones have a choice. And so you want to make sure that your virtual environment is inviting, that you have a human touch layered within that is providing the most amazing experience that even if they're not selected for a position, your brand has been improved. Organizations can provide a lot of knowledge sharing. So if it is doing a webinar about the organization and creating within the environment on a careers page, they can, I would definitely say, overhaul career page, particularly if it doesn't reference anything regarding COVID or the changes that an organization is experiencing. Again, that's going to lead to that authenticity, given that they're not able to come in person. So candidates really need to know that the fabric of the organization is welcoming and dynamic.
All great points. And companies need to think this through. As you've said, there's a lot of aspects to it. And, the most important is that you think about it from the viewpoint of the candidate. The worst thing you can ever do in HR is read your own press clippings. It's really important to put yourself in that, when you've got over 50% in a study saying they feel like they haven't been well taken care of. And yet there are things like chatbot tools, like automated communication tools that could be helping. There are opportunities to warm up the process, even if it's virtual. And you've made some great points. I want to thank Germayne Cade, who's the VP of Client Solutions for Korn Ferry RPO in North America. And you've made some great points. This is Elliot Clark. I'm the CEO of HRO Today. Thank you for your attention to this podcast. And if you're interested in getting more information about some of the things that Germayne has talked about, you can find information about Korn Ferry RPO at www.kornferry.com. And we look forward to you joining us on our next HRO Today educational podcast. Thank you.